What's good, y'all? Shout out to the LDBC. It's your boy Fight Critic, and here to give you guys a couple of videos today. I got a little bit of time on my hands, so I figured it makes sense for me to pump out at least 4 or 5 videos. So today, I got about five or six videos that I'm gonna drop. Hopefully, you guys get a chance to take a look at it. Many of them covering different topics. Obviously, majority of these are just gonna be talking about boxing for the most part. I got a couple of political videos I'm gonna drop a little bit later on today, but I did want to talk about this because this has been a recent theme that has occurred, and I definitely wanted to touch on this. But I wanted to talk a little bit about the the level of one's ego that kind of catapults. The minute that you become not only just a champion in the sport of boxing, but when you become the guy in your division. There's a different level of ego when it comes to being a champion. Some guys become a champion and then they look at this as like this is going to be just like the beginning of their journey. They want to be able to do a ton of things moving forward and X, Y, and Z. And in other situations, you gotta kind of have guys who are champions that just want to stay within, their comfort level, and they want to just be able to fight who they want to fight. And most of the time, when those guys tend to take a step up in competition, they don't essentially perform that well. When you look at guys who have looked at becoming a champion and trying to do it more and over and over and over again, you haven't seen so much of that in this generation of level of fighter. You've probably seen it out of guys at the lower weights like a Naoya Inoue. There's not many guys that I could say, above 147 pounds that have taken the same type of, mindset to doing things. Maybe somebody like Usyk, within the most recent times, has been like somebody who has not been satisfied with just being a champion. But when you look at the flip side of the coin, guys becoming a champion and then just becoming comfortable being a champion, well, you've got an overwhelming majority of champions who are this way. And it happens. What happens usually is that they feel like they've made it to the very top, and like that's where they want to be. They like the level of comfort that happens, and they don't like the opportunity to be in a position where that could be taken away. So when that tends to happen, you get a lot of the situations and the beefs that we have here currently in boxing, where you have a champion who either doesn't look at another champion as being on his level, which can be very debatable. I can't sit there and say that that's wrong or right, but it is very debatable. But on the other side, you have to look at the fact that there's a lot of guys who, in a lot of these divisions, will look at specific things such as, who is the essential target for me in the division. Who can I fight that'll satisfy the fans versus what is the most difficult fight to take for me? And does it make sense for me to build that fight up, work my way to it, or does it make sense for me to take a look at everybody else that's kind of like flailing along, and if I fight these guys and I beat them, I still get to keep my recognition and X, Y, and Z. Now I make all those points to talk about Teofimo Lopez, who is a champion, but also a champion who is also now the guy in the division. And the big reason why I wanted to talk about him is because when it comes to looking at the landscape of the lightweight division, there's only one guy that's still left in that division for Teofimo Lopez to fight, and that's Devin Haney. And he took the biggest opportunity in front of him in Vasily Lomachenko, and he passed it with flying colors. But I think the biggest issue that I have, and this is not necessarily 100% Teofimo Lopez's fault, because some fault does have to go back to Vasily Lomachenko, but it's the fact that Teofimo Lopez is now starting to develop the ego that comes with being the guy in the division, where you feel as though that not only do you get to call the shots, but you also get to tell other people where they are in relation to you, which, like I said before, can be very debatable. But the problem in this situation when it comes to Teofimo Lopez and Devin Haney is that both of these guys are in the same division. They're not tied into a perspective that keeps them from fighting each other. And what makes matters, very interesting is that Teofimo Lopez is heavily favored to beat a guy like Devin Haney, if we're just being honest about it. And for Devin Haney, who we've seen him basically blossom from being this unknown amateur to just skyrocketing up the prospect totem pole into being a champion. This is probably the biggest opportunity that's ever been put in front of him to pretty much, check off everything in what you would call an underdog story. You know, kid comes from a rough part of, of his town, doesn't really get the recognition that a lot of high-ranking amateurs get. He fights a lot of guys, early on in his career. He spars with a lot of guys who've had way better, teachings growing up and way better amateur background experience. And he has to learn from those guys throughout the process. And then he finally gets his opportunity to really step out, and he becomes a champion, and he's defending his title. And now you have the opportunity in front of him for him to actually fight the guy in the division. And it sounds very similar to Teofimo Lopez's story. The big problem that I have, though, is Teofimo Lopez is starting not to act as if he really needs that fight. And that's a big problem for me because of a multitude of reasons. Number one, I'm a fan of Teofimo Lopez, which is the big problem with it. And I don't want to be the kind of guy who doesn't become a fan of yours because of the way that you're acting. I did the same thing to Keith Thurman a couple years back. Liked Keith Thurman, liked everything that he represented. I liked the way that he was combating a lot of the issues when, he wanted to fight Floyd Mayweather, and Floyd was like, no, you should fight this guy, you should fight that guy. I took Keith Thurman's side on that. When Keith Thurman became a champion and essentially was known as the premier welterweight in the division, guy started acting like he was on the pedestal, and I wasn't really a fan of his anymore. We've seen it happen from time to time, and I don't want that situation to happen to Teofimo Lopez. The second part to it that makes it very problematic is Teofimo Lopez is from Brooklyn, and we don't need this type of representation, let alone reputation, to make it seem as though all Brooklyn fighters are this way. Brooklyn has not had a fighter this good in a really long time, I'm not even one of those people that, I'd never really cared for Paulie Malignaggi's career, to be honest. But there hasn't been this good of a fighter probably since Zab Judah. And even with Zab Judah, his career is pretty much night and day, but Zab has accomplished a lot of things that a lot of fighters haven't. And Teofimo Lopez has already exceeded Zab Judah's actual accomplishments, and he's only 23. So when you look at it, you have the opportunity to go down as maybe the best fighter to come out of Brooklyn. So I wouldn't take this opportunity to start stroking your ego when you look at it. And I think the biggest part of all this is that you are using the same type of temperament and attitude that the guy before you used to you. And maybe you feel jaded, maybe you feel disrespected and that you got to keep the same energy. But to me, you give him that energy. You don't give the energy to the rest of the division. You tell that guy to get back in line. You don't tell the rest of the division that when I say jump, you jump. Because you're one fight away from something miraculously happening and you can end up losing. That's what happened to Zab Judah. Zab Judah got comfortable being an undisputed champion, coming off the Corey Spinks win, and he got comfortable, and he got clocked in the face by Carlos Baldemir. And then after that, his career just took a massive nosedive. So you don't want to be in a position where you're looking at who you want to fight, where you want to fight him, when you want to fight him, when there's one clear guy left in the division that you can fight. And he's the one guy who needs this fight more than you, but you also need this fight as well. Because if you don't take this type of fight and you feel like he's not worth it, you're going to lose everybody who jumped behind you going into the Lomachenko fight. So that's what happens when I look at, the situation right now, how it's unfolding with Devin Haney. I don't even care much for him fighting Gervonta Davis, because Gervonta Davis has no business being in the ring with Teofimo Lopez. And last but not least, you also have the fact that you have Top Rank, who is now going to take the attention that they were putting into Lomachenko, take it away from him and now put it into you, and they're going to make you feel like Lomachenko, and it's going to get to your head, and that's the problem. Don't let it get to your head, because we've seen that happen with fighters before. It's happened to Terrence Crawford, and that's why Terrence Crawford's career is very much stagnant right now. I don't want Teofimo Lopez's career to look very fucking stagnant, because that's what happens to all top-ranked fighters, especially because it slows down their ability to understand the marketing of their name. See, one thing about Bob Arum that he's made adjustments for, as he's gotten, more seasoned into how fighters take control of their careers, when he sees that guy who's hit the pinnacle of what he's at, and that next fight, if it's a really good fight, can really catapult him over, he tends to stagnate those fighters. And you saw it what happened with Terrence Crawford. You saw it happen with Jerwin and Kajas. And he's probably going to do the same thing with Neo Inoue pretty soon. He couldn't do it with Mikey Garcia, and he had no choice but to keep giving Pacquiao big fights. So when you look at it, that's essentially how this kind of division, how Top Rank is set up, I should say. Bob Arum doing what he can to take fighters to the next level, and then that very next fight that could really put that guy over to where the guys and the casuals stop saying Top Rank and they start saying the fighter's name. Bob Arum tends to stagnate them out, and I don't want the situation that's happening with Terrence Crawford to happen to Teofimo Lopez, where you just get stalled out. You're known as a very good fighter. You have an amazing record. You have good wins, but you start to fight a lot of the same competition.